We are basically 25% of the way through the season, and I'm sure that you are all starting to see the direction that your team is heading in this year more and more clearly. So, I just wanted to share some tips for teams at each level of your standings right now. What to do if you're 4-0, if you're 0-4, or you're somewhere in the middle. So, let's start at the top. Those of you out there that are 4-0, and I'll even group in the 3-1 teams that are doing really well. Maybe you guys just had an unfortunate matchup, but you're probably sitting in first through fourth place, and you have your eyes set on a championship this year. So, what do you do from here on out to increase your odds of actually winning this year? Well, step one, I want to actually make sure that you are a legit contender, which may sound weird if you're undefeated or 3-1, but sometimes you get lucky and you win some games against bad teams that maybe you wouldn't have won if you played another contender. So there's two ways that I go about checking this. Both go kind of hand in hand. The first is just plain old points for. If you're actually contending, I want to see that your points for is in the top 4 or 5 of your league. That's a really good signal that your team is actually producing well and you aren't relying heavily on luck to win your matchups. The second stat to find is all play record, which again, I want to see you in the top 4 or 5 to match with points for and your overall record. And all play is just measuring how your team would fare against every other team in your league every single week. So if you're consistently among the top scorers weekly, your all play win percentage should be high. But if you're just an average scorer or lower, then your all play percentage is going to be down. So if you look up both of those signals and they correlate well with your actual record, then you are legit. If not, maybe you're not as strong as your record actually suggests, and you might want to identify more as like a middling 2-2 team just because you kind of got lucky in a couple of matchups. But with that out of the way, if you are an actual contender, what should you be looking to do? Obviously, you have a strong roster. You've made good start-sit decisions so far, but the urge to push harder starts to take over. And sometimes, maybe if not even oftentimes, that urge can cause you to make a really bad decision. So step 2 is don't make big changes to change the core of your lineup, especially in the name of this trade helps me win now. No, that's baloney. And I made a whole video about that before this season started that I'm going to link somewhere up in here. But essentially, don't make short-term moves to benefit your roster at the expense of your future. For example, don't trade away a first-round pick for Dameon Pierce because you lost Nick Chubb and you need a running back. Don't trade away Garrett Wilson for Devontae Adams because Zach Wilson is the worst quarterback in the league and Garrett Wilson's not producing well. Don't make any move now that you wouldn't do in March when no one is scoring points, because the absolute worst thing that can happen is you don't win this year, and now you have a roster with a bunch of aging veterans that's going to lose value in the offseason, and you're just waiting until next year before you can actually trade them away, because you can't trade them away for anything close to what you paid for it in season. But let's say best case scenario, you do win the championship after making a big move like that. If your team was that good, Devontae Adams' extra 4 to 5 points per game over Garrett Wilson probably didn't matter all that much when you're winning every single week by 15 or more points. You'd have probably won anyway had you just kept Garrett Wilson. And now you have Garrett Wilson heading into year 3 as a 24-year-old wide receiver than a 31-year-old Devontae Adams who has lost value in the offseason. So the alternative to this, and I'm going to call this step 3, is make small moves to improve your roster using less valuable assets and draft picks. You need a running back because you lost Nick Chubb or J.K. Dobbins. Instead of trading away your first for Kyron Williams, trade away your second for James Conner, or 2 seconds for Brian Robinson or Miles Sanders, or that 23-year-old wide receiver 6 on your team that people still believe in, but he's not really doing anything. He's expendable, so move someone like Sky Moore away for a running back. The same thing works for wide receivers. Buy guys like Jacoby Myers, Tyler Lockett, Michael Thomas for fractions of the cost that DJ Moore, Calvin Ridley, or Keenan Allen actually cost right now. And while we're discussing trades, I'm going to add in step 3B here, is just to acquire handcuff running backs. We've already seen how important it can be to have handcuffs this year with all the running back injuries so far through 4 weeks. Jerome Ford, Zach Moss, Gus Edwards, and Justice Hill, Matt Breida. Kyron Williams was a handcuff before the season even started, and now he's like a top 10 running back. Even though Joshua Kelly wasn't good as a starter, people thought that he was going to be good, and his value shot up drastically. Scoop up these guys off of waiver wires, get them tossed into your next trade as a throw-in because they're not valuable until they become valuable. We still have 13 more weeks of football. I promise you, players are going to keep getting hurt, especially running backs, so start hoarding handcuffs right now. And the final step, this is going to sound really weird, but hear me out on this one, is take advantage of your competition's desperation. And by that, I mean be the guy who sells Devontae Adams to another contender for Garrett Wilson. Be the one who sells Javonte Williams or Dameon Pierce for that future first-round pick. find ways to take advantage of other managers getting desperate to hold on to their championship hopes and improve your future outlook while not really changing the odds of you winning a championship this year. And I know that this sounds weird, and it's going to feel weird whenever you actually make that move, because mentally it's hard to send away Davante Adams to another team that is competing with you to win, and you just feel like you made that team better. But there are certain moves in certain circumstances where this does work really well. Now, I'm not saying to trade away like Tyreek Hill for Drake London for the namesake of future value or anything like that, but can you move off of Mike Evans right now for Zay Flowers or Michael Pittman or maybe even Jackson Smith-Njigba or T. Higgins because they're hurt or underproducing? You never know. Some people are really desperate, so be the person who takes advantage of that desperation. All right, but enough with the 4-0, the 3-1 teams. Those guys are at the top of the standings. They're winning. They're having fun. What about these middling teams, the 2-2 teams, maybe the 1-3 teams who had a tough matchup, or maybe you're 3-1 or even 4-0, but when you looked at your points for and your all play, you actually found that you've been pretty lucky and you're thinking maybe that luck runs out soon. To all of these kind of teams, I now speak to you. And this is a really tough place to be in because you could be pushed one way or another by stringing together a couple of wins here over the next couple of weeks, or by taking a couple of losses in the row over the next couple of weeks. And the worst place to be in Dynasty is right in the middle. So really, the only step here is that you need to decide which direction to lean more into over the next couple of weeks. And I say specifically the word lean into because you don't need to do anything crazy to really force yourself one way or another. So if you're deciding that you still want to go for a title this year, lean into making a couple small moves that can help you win matchups now. Again, nothing crazy. We're not selling Josh Jacobs for Kyron Williams because Jacobs hasn't been producing lately and Kyron Williams has been awesome. We're not selling T. Higgins for Keenan Allen because the Bengals offense has started slow and now T. Higgins has an injury. We're making small moves like you would if you're competing, just more focused on more short-term points. Like Brian Robinson, for example, plays the Bears this week, Thursday night. The Bears have been horrendous against the run all year. You go buy Brian Robinson for Kendre Miller in a second, and if he scores 20 points, you're probably in good shape to just buy a win that you probably wouldn't have gotten beforehand. Or at wide receiver, the Titans have been a pass funnel all year long, so go buy Michael Pittman this week by trading like Zay Flowers and a third, and you can buy a win that way. And if you start stringing together 2, 3, 4 wins in a row, you're 4-2, 5-2, 6-2 at the end of October, then that pushes you into contender mode and you can start following the steps that I outlined at the beginning of this video. Or you can start to lean the other way and begin looking at 2024. And again, I'm saying lean because you don't need to go crazy yet and strip this thing down to the bones just because you're 2-2, but start looking at moves to make to get a little bit younger or shed a little bit of fat with some more short-term assets. Some example of this are doing things that I already mentioned, like being the guy who sells Davante Adams for Garrett Wilson, or sell Calvin Ridley for Zay Flowers, Austin Eckler for Breece Hall, George Kittle for Kyle Pitts. Or if you've rostered handcuffs that have now gained a ton of value, trade those short-term assets away before they lose that value again. I'm talking guys like Jerome Ford, Zach Moss, even honestly Kyron Williams and Raheem Mostert are not long-term guys at running back, or players at other positions like Tutu Atwell, Adam Thielen, Courtland Sutton, Romeo Doubs, Hunter Henry even at tight end. These are all moves that can buy you back years of age or future draft picks and add to your roster's long-term value. And hey, maybe the guys that you get in these deals still produce for you and you just happen upon a 5 or a 6 seed and a Cinderella shot at a title. You never know. Things can happen that are really, really weird in fantasy football. But I will add a final note here to teams that are beginning to lean in either direction. Give yourself a deadline. By that, I mean, don't go until like week 9 or 10 or 11 still being undecided about the direction of your team. There needs to be a deadline on this thing because the worst place to be in Dynasty is right in the middle. Give yourself 2 or 3 or 4 weeks at the absolute most to let your team tell you what it wants to do this year before you actually step in and make the decision yourself. And honestly, 99% of the time, that decision is just going to be pulling the plug and putting up a for sale sign on your roster. Which leads me to the bottom of the standings, the 1-3 and 0-4 teams that are sitting in 9th, 10th, 11th, last place right now. Some of you were probably here by design. You knew that 2023 wasn't going to be your year, and this is where you actually ended up wanting to be. But some of you out here aren't here on purpose, and that's a tough pill to swallow, believe me, I know, but that's honestly step one here is you got to face reality. That fat lady is singing whether you hear her or not, and sure, maybe you can go on a run, squeak into the playoffs as a 6 seed, and then anyone can win, but Come on here, let's be realistic. The odds of that happening are really slim with where you're at right now. Why not maximize your odds of winning a future championship rather than mess around with trying to salvage this season? So after you've reconciled with reality, you maybe cried a little bit in the shower. It's totally fine. It's totally normal. What do you do from here? Well, your goals have shifted. Your new championship this year is the 2024 Rookie 1.01. Everything you do from here until January is with that one goal in mind. And if you found yourself in this position and you don't have your 2024 first, then you do everything you possibly can to get it back, because then all of this is just useless. Tanking and not doing well is useless if you don't have your first. You might as well just try to win games at that point. So do everything you possibly can to get your first back. But let's assume you have your first. What you need to do is just continue on this path of losing matchups this season and sell anything that doesn't offer long-term value or upside. And I mean everything. There is no reason why you should have Geno Smith on your team at 0-4. Sell him. He's gone. You still have Deebo Samuel on your team because you had him in 2021 for his breakout. Doesn't matter. He's almost 28 years old. Sell him to a contender for value now. You also shouldn't have any valuable running backs on your team. Honestly, you probably shouldn't really have any starting running back on your team for that matter. They're all short-term assets. Sell them while they're producing now before they get hurt and turn into J.K. Dobbins or Nick Chubb. The priority here is just shifting your roster's assets over to longer-term and more stable positions and players to insulate your value heading into the 2024 offseason. If you're in a super flex league, prioritize fixing your quarterbacks and your wide receivers first. In one quarterback leagues, go for wide receivers. And if you happen upon a stud quarterback, then that's great too. Tight ends are kind of the same way. If you happen upon a Kyle Pitts or a Dalton Kincaid or Sam Laporta, then great. If not, it's probably best to sell away Mark Andrews and George Kittle, and maybe even sell away TJ Hawkinson as well too with the way that he's been producing. But definitely keep players that fit your rebuild. Like if you have Justin Herbert, you probably just want to hold on to him because he's still super young, he's elite, and he will still be elite in 1, 2, 3 years down the road when you're ready to win. Hang on to players like him or Chris Olave, Devontae Smith, Michael Pittman, the young tight ends that I just mentioned. You don't have to have a massive yard sale and sell away your couch and your dining table and your beds and your furniture. We're just purging the stuff that you don't need anymore, like those old lamps or an extra TV or whatever it is that you have just extra laying around in your house. Yeah, I'm not going to lie. That analogy sounded better in my head, but I hope you get the point. You know where I'm going with that. So there you have it, a plan of attack at each level of competition for your Dynasty rosters over the rest of the 2023 season. And if this video was helpful, please hit the like button so we can spread this video to more people. And if you're not yet subscribed, please consider doing so. And if you're looking for some players to buy right now, based on if you're contending or if you're rebuilding, Justin dropped a video for each of those, which you can check right up here.